Pilot burned black man's boarding pass, then went pale when he flashed his FBI badge. This boarding pass is fake. I'm not letting you on my aircraft. I suggest you reconsider that decision, Captain, before you make this situation much worse for yourself. The airport gate area had gone completely silent. Every passenger waiting to board Flight 447 to Chicago had stopped what they were doing to watch the confrontation unfolding at the jetway entrance. Captain Brian Foster, a tall man in his mid-40s with salt and pepper hair and the crisp Navy uniform of Transatlantic Airlines, stood blocking the doorway. In his hand, he held the torn pieces of what had been a first-class boarding pass just moments before. Marcus Williams stood facing him, a well-built black man in his late 50s wearing a simple gray sweater and dark slacks. Marcus's expression remained calm, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes, the kind of quiet authority that comes from years of dealing with dangerous situations. Behind him, nearly 200 passengers had formed a line, and all of them were now staring at the scene with a mixture of shock and uncomfortable recognition. Captain Foster's face had flushed red. "Security!" he called out, his voice echoing through the gate area. "I need security at Gate 23 immediately." Sarah Chen, a flight attendant who had been checking boarding passes at the gate, stepped forward nervously. "Captain Foster, sir, I scanned his pass myself. It came up valid, first class, seat 2A. I don't care what the scanner said," Captain Foster snapped. "Look at him. Does he look like someone who can afford a first-class ticket?" The words hung in the air like poison. Several passengers gasped. An elderly white woman clutched her purse tighter. A young couple exchanged uncomfortable glances. Marcus Williams reached slowly into his jacket pocket. The movement was deliberate, controlled. Captain Foster tensed, his hand moving instinctively toward his side. But what Marcus pulled out wasn't a weapon. It was a leather wallet. He flipped it open to reveal a gold badge and identification card. "Special Agent Marcus Williams," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "Federal Bureau of Investigation. And you, Captain, just destroyed federal property and violated at least 3 federal statutes." Captain Foster's face went from red to white in an instant. The color drained so quickly that he looked like he might faint. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. "Now," Marcus continued, his voice still calm but with steel underneath, "would you like to explain to your supervisor, the airport police, and potentially a federal judge why you profiled a federal agent and prevented him from boarding an aircraft? But let's go back to how this all started. It was just 3 hours earlier when Marcus Williams had kissed his wife goodbye at their home in suburban Washington, D.C., and headed to Reagan National Airport. The morning had been ordinary in every way that mattered. Marcus had packed his small carry-on bag the night before, a habit from his years in the bureau where he'd learned to always be ready to move quickly. His wife, Patricia, had made his favorite breakfast, scrambled eggs with peppers and toast, the same meal she'd prepared for him on countless mornings over their 32 years of marriage. "Do you really have to go?" Patricia had asked, though she already knew the answer. Patricia Williams was a retired schoolteacher, a woman with kind eyes and silver hair she wore in a neat bun. She had stood in their kitchen, coffee cup in hand, watching her husband with the same mixture of love and concern she'd carried throughout his career. "Tom needs me there, Patty," Marcus had replied, using the nickname he'd called her since their college days at Howard University. "The funeral is tomorrow morning. He's my brother. I have to be there." Tom Williams, Marcus's younger brother by 3 years, lived in Chicago. Tom's wife, Alina, had passed away suddenly the previous week from a heart attack. She had been only 54 years old. Tom and Alina had been married for 30 years, and Tom was devastated. Marcus had spoken to his brother every day since Alina's death, and he could hear the grief crushing Tom's voice with each conversation. "I know you do," Patricia had said softly. She'd walked over and straightened his collar, a gesture she'd performed thousands of times. "Just promise me you'll be careful, and Marcus, talk to him, really talk to him, about everything." Marcus had known what she meant. Tom and Marcus had been close as children, growing up in rural Virginia in the 1960s. But they'd drifted apart over the years, especially after Marcus joined the FBI in 1978. There had been arguments, misunderstandings, and long silences. The kind of rifts that form between brothers when life takes them in different directions. "I will," Marcus had promised. He'd kissed Patricia, grabbed his bag, and headed out the door. The drive to Reagan National Airport had taken 40 minutes in the morning traffic. Marcus had retired from the FBI 3 years earlier, after 35 years of service. He'd worked everything from bank robberies to domestic terrorism cases. He'd received commendations, been shot twice in the line of duty, and had testified before Congress. But retirement had been harder than he'd expected. Patricia had adjusted beautifully. She filled her days with volunteer work, book clubs, and time with their grandchildren. Marcus had struggled to find his rhythm. At the airport, Marcus had checked in at the Transatlantic Airlines kiosk. He'd used his savings to buy a first-class ticket, something he rarely did, but the flight was 3 hours long and his back wasn't what it used to be. Years of sitting in surveillance vans and the 2 bullets he'd taken had left him with chronic pain. The first-class seat would give him room to stretch out. The ticket agent, a young man named Kevin with bright red hair and freckles, had processed Marcus's ticket without issue. "First class to Chicago, Mr. Williams," Kevin had said cheerfully. "Seat 2A boarding starts in about 2 hours at gate 23. Have a great flight." Marcus had thanked him and made his way through security. Even after retirement, Marcus carried himself like a federal agent, alert, observant, and calm. He'd noticed the TSA agent giving him a second look when checking his ID, but his credentials were in order, and he passed through without incident. He'd found a quiet spot near gate 23 and settled in to wait. The airport had been moderately busy for a Thursday morning in September. Business people in suits hurried past, families with small children struggled with strollers and diaper bags, and elderly couples moved slowly, holding hands. Marcus had pulled out his phone and called Tom. "Hey, big brother," Tom had answered. Tom's voice sounded hollow, exhausted. Marcus knew that sound. He'd heard it in the voices of countless people who'd lost loved ones over his career. "How are you holding up?" Marcus had asked. "I'm not," Tom had admitted. "The house is too quiet, Marcus. I keep expecting Alina to walk through the door to hear her laugh, but she's not coming back." Marcus had felt his chest tight. "I'm at the airport now. I'll be there by early afternoon. We'll get through this together." "I'm glad you're coming," Tom had said. "I know things have been complicated between us, but I need my brother right now." "I'm here," Marcus had assured him. "I'm always here for you, Tom. I'm sorry if I haven't shown that enough over the years." They'd talked for another 20 minutes before hanging up. Marcus had sat there, thinking about his brother, about Alina, about all the years that had passed. He'd thought about their childhood in Virginia, about their father who'd worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table, about their mother who'd died too young from cancer. He'd thought about how he and Tom used to be inseparable, and how life had slowly pulled them apart. At 11:30, the gate agent had announced that first-class passengers could begin boarding. Marcus had gathered his bag and joined the small line of about a dozen people waiting to board. Most were business travelers, men in expensive suits, women with designer luggage. One elderly couple held hands as they waited. That's when Marcus had first noticed Captain Brian Foster. Captain Foster had emerged from the jetway, clipboard in hand, conducting what appeared to be a final check before boarding. He was tall, probably 6'2", with an athletic build and the confident bearing of someone who'd been in command for years. He'd worn his uniform well crisp, pressed, every button polished. Captain Foster had been scanning the boarding area when his eyes landed on Marcus. The change in his expression had been subtle but unmistakable to someone trained in reading people. His jaw had tightened. His eyes had narrowed slightly. He'd looked Marcus up and down, taking in his simple sweater and slacks, and something had shifted in his demeanor. Marcus had recognized that look immediately. He'd seen it countless times over his 58 years. It was the look of judgment, of assumption, of prejudice. After 3.5 decades as one of the few black FBI agents in the Bureau, Marcus knew discrimination when he saw it. But Marcus had said nothing. He'd simply waited his turn in line, boarding pass in hand. Sarah Chen, the flight attendant working the gate, had been a petite woman in her early 30s with kind eyes and a warm smile. She'd been scanning boarding passes efficiently, greeting each passenger by name. "Good morning, Mr. Peterson. Welcome aboard, Mrs. Richardson. Lovely to see you again." When Marcus reached the front of the line, Sarah had scanned his boarding pass. It had beeped confirmation. "Good morning, Mr. Williams. First class, seat 2A. Enjoy your flight." "Thank you," Marcus had replied with a polite smile. But as Marcus had taken a step toward the jetway, Captain Foster had moved to block his path. "Excuse me," Captain Foster had said, his voice tight. "May I see your boarding pass?" Marcus had paused. Sarah Chen had looked confused. "Captain, I already scanned it. It came up valid." "I'd like to see it myself," Captain Foster had insisted. Marcus had handed over the boarding pass, watching Captain Foster carefully. Years of investigative work had taught Marcus to stay calm in confrontational situations, to observe, to wait for people to reveal themselves. Captain Foster had examined the boarding pass, turning it over in his hands. "This doesn't look right," he'd announced loudly, loud enough for other passengers to hear. Captain Foster, Sarah had interjected, her voice uncertain. The system verified, the system can be fooled, Captain Foster had cut her off. He'd looked at Marcus with barely concealed hostility. Where did you get this ticket? I purchased it, Marcus had replied calmly, 2 days ago through your airline's website. A first-class ticket. Captain Foster's tone had been thick with skepticism. That's over $1,200. The implication had been clear to everyone watching. Marcus had felt anger rising in his chest, but he'd kept his voice level. I'm aware of the price. I paid for it with my credit card. Captain Foster had glanced back at the other first-class passengers, most of whom were white, all of whom looked uncomfortable with the situation unfolding before them. Then Captain Foster had made his decision. Without warning, he'd torn the boarding pass in half. This boarding pass is fake. I'm not letting you on my aircraft. I suggest you reconsider that decision, Captain, before you make this situation much worse for yourself. And that's how, moments later, Marcus had revealed his FBI badge, watching Captain Foster's face drain of color as the full weight of his actions crashed down on him. I'm the captain. This is my flight. Not anymore, Linda Morrison replied. You just committed an act of discrimination against a federal agent in front of 200 witnesses and at least a dozen cameras. You're lucky if the only thing that happens is you lose your job. As the security officers moved to escort Captain Foster away, the pilot's composure finally cracked. I was just doing my job. I was protecting my aircraft. You see them on the news every day, people who don't belong, people who cause problems. The words hung in the air, ugly and naked in their prejudice. Marcus felt something old and familiar twist in his gut, the same feeling he'd carried since childhood, growing up in Virginia in the 1960s when segregation was ending on paper but lingering in hearts and minds. Linda Morrison stepped closer to Captain Foster, her voice low but carrying. Get him out of my sight. As the officers led Captain Foster away, his protests echoing down the terminal, Linda Morrison turned to Marcus. Agent Williams, I cannot begin to express how sorry I am. This is unacceptable, and Transatlantic Airlines will make this right. Marcus nodded slowly. The anger that had been building in him started to subside, replaced by a bone-deep weariness. I just want to get to Chicago, Ms. Morrison. My brother needs me. Of course, Linda Morrison said. She turned to Sarah Chen. Sarah, please print Agent Williams a new first-class boarding pass immediately. And upgrade him to first class on his return flight as well, no charge. She looked back at Marcus. That's the least we can do, though I know it doesn't erase what happened. Within 5 minutes, Marcus had a new boarding pass and an escort to his seat. The other first-class passengers avoided making eye contact with him. As he settled into seat 2A, the elderly couple who'd been holding hands was seated across the aisle in seats 2C and 2D after Marcus buckled in. The elderly man leaned. Son, the man said quietly. His name was Edward Patterson, and he looked to be in his 80s with white hair and kind, weathered face. I'm sorry for what just happened, and I'm sorry I didn't speak up when it was happening. That was wrong of me. Marcus looked at Edward Patterson for a long moment. He could see genuine remorse in the old man's eyes. Thank you for saying that, sir. Edward's wife, Dorothy, reached over and touched Marcus's arm gently. My husband fought in Korea, she said. We've lived through enough history to know better. We should have spoken up. I'm ashamed we didn't. It's hard to speak up, Marcus replied, surprised by the compassion he felt for this couple. Fear makes cowards of all of us sometimes. The new captain, a younger man named Captain James Rodriguez, Officer Rodriguez's cousin, as it turned out, came on the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I apologize for the delay. We'll be pushing back from the gate in just a few minutes. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for departure. As the aircraft pushed back and began taxiing toward the runway, Marcus closed his eyes. He thought about Captain Foster, about the fear and hatred in the man's face. He thought about the countless times over his career he'd faced similar prejudice, from witnesses who didn't believe he was really an FBI agent, from police officers who assumed he was a suspect, from shopkeepers who watched him like a criminal. Plane lifted off, climbing through the clouds. Marcus watched the ground fall away, watched the capital city shrink to miniature below. He thought about Tom, about Alina, about the funeral tomorrow. He thought about all the things he should have said to his brother over the years, but hadn't. The flight attendants served drinks and snacks. Sarah Chen made a point of checking on Marcus several times, her apology sincere and heartfelt. I should have done more, she kept saying. I should have stood up to him. You did fine, Marcus assured her. You told the truth when it mattered. 2 hours into the 3-hour flight, Marcus found himself in conversation with Edward and Dorothy Patterson. They'd been married for 58 years, they told him. They'd raised 4 children, had 9 grandchildren, and were flying to Chicago to visit their youngest daughter. "I met Dorothy in 1954, Edward said, his eyes getting that faraway look people get when remembering young love. "I was just back from Korea. She was working at the 5 and Dime store in our town in Pennsylvania. I went in to buy cigarettes. I quit 30 years ago, thank God, and there she was, pretty as a picture, with red hair and green eyes." Dorothy smiled and patted her husband's hand. Her hair was white now, but Marcus could imagine the red it had been. "He was so nervous he couldn't even speak properly, kept calling me ma'am like I was his commanding officer." They talked about their life together, about watching the country change through the decades, the civil rights movement, Vietnam, Watergate, the fall of the Berlin Wall. They talked about raising their children to be kind, to stand up for what was right, to see people as people. "But sometimes we failed," Edward admitted quietly. "Sometimes we stayed silent when we should have spoken, like today at the gate. I saw what was happening, and I told myself it wasn't my business. That was wrong." Marcus found himself opening up to this couple, telling them about his career in the FBI, about the challenges he'd faced as one of the few black agents in the bureau. He told them about his brother Tom, about Alina's death, about the rift between them that he hoped to mend. "Family is everything," Dorothy said firmly. "Everything else fades away, but family remains. You go to your brother, Marcus, you hold him and you tell him you love him and you don't let old hurts keep you apart." When the plane landed at O'Hare International Airport in Chicago, Edward and Dorothy Patterson insisted on exchanging phone numbers with Marcus. "If you ever come to Pennsylvania, you call us," Dorothy said. "We'll have you and your wife over for dinner." Marcus promised he would. As he gathered his bag and prepared to deplane, Sarah Chen approached him one last time. "Agent Williams," she said, "I spoke with Ms. Morrison during the flight. Transatlantic Airlines wants to make a formal apology. They're also going to be conducting mandatory diversity training for all staff, starting with the flight crews." Marcus nodded. "That's good, but Sarah, let me tell you something. The training is important, but it's not enough. What matters is people like you being willing to speak up when you see something wrong. You did that today, don't forget that." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I will never forget today, I promise you that." Marcus rented a car at O'Hare and drove to Tom's house in the suburbs. It was a modest 2-story home in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where people mowed their lawns on Saturday mornings and kids rode bikes in the street. The kind of place Alina had always dreamed of, Tom had told him once. Marcus parked in the driveway and sat for a moment, gathering his courage. He and Tom hadn't seen each other face to face in over 2 years, not since a tense Thanksgiving where old arguments had resurfaced. They talked on the phone occasionally, but there had been distance between them, a wall built from years of misunderstandings and different life choices. Before Marcus could get out of the car, the front door opened and Tom appeared. Tom Williams looked like an older, shorter version of Marcus. He was 55, with graying hair and tired eyes. He'd put on weight over the years. Alina had been an excellent cook, but grief had carved hollows in his cheeks over the past week. Marcus got out of the car and the two brothers stood looking at each other across the driveway. Then Tom's face crumpled and he started to cry. Marcus crossed the distance between them in seconds and pulled his brother into a tight embrace. "I got you," Marcus said, holding Tom as his brother shook with sobs. "I got you, little brother, I'm here." They stood there for a long time, 2 grown men holding each other in a driveway in Chicago, all the years of distance melting away in the face of shared grief and brotherly love. That evening, Marcus and Tom sat in Tom's living room, surrounded by photographs of Alina. She had been a beautiful woman with a warm smile and kind eyes, a first-grade teacher who'd spent 40 years helping children learn to read. The house was filled with small touches that showed her personality: colorful throw pillows, plants in every room, children's artwork on the refrigerator from former students who'd never forgotten her. "I keep expecting her to walk through that door," Tom said for what must have been the 100th time since Alina's death. "I keep thinking this is all a nightmare, and I'm going to wake up and she'll be here, making her terrible coffee and singing off-key to her old Supremes records." Marcus smiled sadly. "She did love the Supremes. Remember that summer when we were kids and Mom took us to Washington, D.C.? Tom asked suddenly. "We must have been, 12 and 15? "I was 16, you were 13, Marcus corrected. "It was the summer of 1969, right after the moon landing." "That's right," Tom said. "We'd watched Armstrong walk on the moon on Mr. Henderson's television because we didn't have one, and Mom had saved up all year to take us to see the Capitol." Marcus remembered. Their mother, Grace Williams, had worked as a seamstress, and their father, Robert Williams, had worked construction, a night job at a warehouse and weekend shifts at a gas station. Money had been tight more than tight. But Grace had been determined that her boys would see the seat of American power, would understand that the country belonged to them too. "We stayed in that terrible motel," Marcus recalled, "where the air conditioning didn't work and the sheets smelled like bleach." "But Mom was so happy," Tom said, his voice thick with memory. "She took us to every monument, every museum. She made us read the words on the Lincoln Memorial out loud. 'Fourscore and 7 years ago,'" Marcus quoted softly. "She told us that day that things were changing," Tom continued. "That we were living through history, that we could be anything we wanted to be, do anything we wanted to do. She believed that so fiercely, Marcus. She believed in America even when America didn't believe in her." Marcus felt his throat tighten. Their mother had died of cancer in 1975 when Marcus was just finishing college. She'd never lived to see him join the FBI, never lived to see him become the agent she'd always believed he could be. "I think about Mom a lot," Marcus admitted, "especially days like today." "What happened today?" Tom asked, noting something in his brother's voice, so Marcus told him. He told Tom about Captain Foster, about the torn boarding pass, about the confrontation at the gate. He told him about Edward and Dorothy Patterson, about their apology and their shame. Tom listened without interrupting. When Marcus finished, Tom was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Do you ever get tired, Marcus? Tired of having to prove yourself, tired of being looked at with suspicion, tired of carrying that badge just to be treated like a human being?" "Every single day," Marcus replied honestly. "But that's not why I carried the badge, Tom. I carried it because I wanted to be the kind of agent Mom would have been proud of. I wanted to prove that we belonged everywhere, that we could do anything. Was it naive? Maybe. Did I face discrimination? Constantly. But I also put bad people in prison. I helped people. I made a difference." "I know you did," Tom said. "And I'm proud of you, big brother. I've always been proud of you, even when I was angry at you." This was the opening Marcus had been waiting for. "Why were you angry, Tom? Talk to me, really talk to me." Tom stood and walked to the window, looking out at the darkening street. "When you joined the FBI, I was proud. I bragged to everyone about my big brother, the federal agent. But then years went by and you were always working. You missed my wedding because you were on a case. You missed Mom's last Thanksgiving because you were on a case. When Dad died, you came to the funeral, but you left the next day because you had to get back to work." Marcus felt each word like a physical blow because they were true, all of them. "And then," Tom continued, his voice breaking, "when I told you that Alina and I couldn't have children, that the doctors said it wasn't possible, you were kind. You said the right things, but you didn't really talk to me, Marcus. You didn't ask how I felt, what we were going through. You sent a card and went back to your cases." "Tom, let me finish," Tom said, turning to face his brother. "I'm not trying to hurt you, Marcus. I'm just trying to explain. It felt like you chose the job over family, like being an FBI agent was more important than being my brother. And I know that's not fair, and I know you were doing important work, but that's how it felt, like I lost my brother to the Bureau." Marcus stood and walked to where Tom stood by the window. "You're right," he said simply. "About all of it. I did choose the job too often. I told myself I was doing important work, that I was making a difference, that I was honoring Mom's memory by being the best agent I could be. But the truth is, I also used the job to avoid dealing with hard emotions. It was easier to focus on cases than to sit with you and Alina and talk about infertility. It was easier to chase criminals than to grieve with you when Dad died." Tom's eyes filled with tears. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I'm tired of the distance between us," Marcus said. "Because Alina's death reminded me that life is too short and too precious to waste on old hurts. Because you're my brother and I love you, and I should have shown you that better over the years." The two brothers embraced again, this time without the urgency of grief, but with the warmth of reconciliation. They held each other for a long moment, and when they pulled apart, both had tears on their faces. "Alina would be glad you're here," Tom said. "She always said you'd come back to me eventually. She said the best brothers always find their way back to each other." That night, Marcus and Tom stayed up late, talking the way they had as boys. They talked about their childhood in Virginia, about their parents, about the times they'd gotten into trouble together. They talked about Alina, about the life she and Tom had built together, about the students she'd taught and the lives she'd touched. Tom showed Marcus photographs spanning 30 years of marriage, Alina in her wedding dress, young and radiant. Alina holding her first nephew at a family reunion. Alina receiving a teaching award. Alina and Tom on a cruise they'd taken for their 25th anniversary. Each photo showed a woman who'd lived fully, loved deeply, and made the world brighter. "She was my best friend," Tom said. "For 30 years, she was my best friend. I don't know how to do life without her, Marcus." You take it one day at a time, Marcus replied. Some days you'll be okay and some days you won't be, but you keep going because that's what she'd want you to do, and you don't do it alone. I'm here now, Tom. I'm here and I'm not going anywhere. The funeral the next day was beautiful and heartbreaking. The church was packed with Alina's former students, now grown with children of their own, who came to pay their respects to the teacher who'd changed their lives. One woman in her 30s stood and spoke about how Alina had taught her to read when no one else could, how Alina had stayed after school every day for months, patiently working with her until the words on the page finally made sense. A former principal spoke about Alina's dedication, her creativity, her boundless compassion. Alina Williams didn't just teach children to read, the principal said. She taught them to believe in themselves. She taught them that they mattered, that they had value, that they could learn and grow and become anything they dreamed. Marcus sat beside Tom in the front pew, holding his brother's hand as Tom wept. Marcus thought about his own life, about the years he'd spent chasing criminals and building cases. Important work, necessary work. But had he touched lives the way Alina had? Had he made people feel valued and seen and loved? At the cemetery, as Alina's casket was lowered into the ground, Tom broke down completely. Marcus held him up, literally supporting his brother's weight as grief threatened to collapse Tom entirely. The other mourners gave them space, understanding that this was a moment for brothers, for family, for the bonds that transcended even death. After the funeral, people gathered at Tom's house for food and fellowship. Neighbors brought casseroles and pies. Former students shared stories about Alina. Marcus found himself in the kitchen helping to organize food and make coffee when an elderly black woman approached him. "You must be Tom's brother Marcus," she said. "I'm Dolores Johnson. I taught with Alina for 20 years before I retired." "It's nice to meet you," Marcus said. "Alina talked about you often," Dolores continued. "She said you were an FBI agent, that you dedicated your life to justice. She was so proud of you." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "I didn't know that." "Oh yes," Dolores said. "She used to tell me that Tom missed you terribly but was too stubborn to say so. She said that you and Tom were both good men who'd let pride and misunderstanding keep you apart, but that one day you'd find your way back to each other." Dolores smiled gently. She was a wise woman. She knew that the best love survives even when we're foolish. That evening, after the last guest had left and the house was quiet again, Marcus and Tom sat on the back porch, watching fireflies dance in the growing darkness. The air was warm and thick with the scent of late summer flowers, Alina's garden, still blooming despite her absence. "I've been thinking," Tom said after a long silence, "about what I'm going to do now. The house is too big for just me. All of Alina's things are here everywhere I look, but I'm not ready to leave, not yet." "You don't have to decide anything right now," Marcus assured him. "No, but I need something to focus on," Tom replied. "Something that would honor Alina's memory. She spent her life helping children, making a difference in her community. I want to do something like that, set up a scholarship fund maybe, or donate to schools that need supplies." "That's a beautiful idea," Marcus said. "Will you help me?" Tom asked. "I mean really help me. Not just send a check or make a phone call, but actually be involved. I know you're retired now. I know Patricia wants to spend time with you. But I need my brother for this, Marcus." Marcus didn't hesitate. "I'll help you with anything you need. I promise." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fireflies and listening to the sounds of the neighborhood children playing in a distant yard, someone's television playing the evening news, the soft hum of air conditioners. "I've been thinking about something else too," Marcus said eventually. "What happened at the airport yesterday, that pilot, Captain Foster? What about him?" Tom asked. "I keep wondering about his story," Marcus said. "I was so angry, and I had every right to be angry, but later I started wondering what made him that way. What experiences shaped him into someone who would profile a passenger and tear up his boarding pass? Was he always like that, or did life make him that way?" Tom considered this. "Does it matter?" "Maybe," Marcus replied. "I spent 35 years putting people in prison. I was good at it. But I also learned that almost everyone has a story, a reason for becoming who they are. That doesn't excuse what they do, but it helps me understand it. Understanding isn't the same as forgiving, but it's important." "You're a better man than me," Tom said. "I don't think I could wonder about the humanity of someone who treated me like that." "It took me years to get here," Marcus admitted. "Years of therapy after I retired, years of Patricia telling me I needed to let go of some of the anger I'd carried. But I learned that holding on to that anger was hurting me more than anyone else, so I started trying to understand instead of just judge." "Did it help?" Tom asked. "Sometimes," Marcus said. "Not always. Some people are just broken beyond repair, but most people are just scared and ignorant and trying to protect themselves from things they don't understand." Captain Foster looked at me and saw a threat because that's what he'd been taught to see. The media, society, his upbringing, something made him afraid of black men. He should lose his job, Tom said firmly. He probably will, Marcus agreed. And he should face consequences for what he did, but I also hope he learns from it. I hope this becomes a turning point for him, a moment when he confronts his prejudices and decides to be better. Marcus pulled out his phone and looked at the business card Linda Morrison had given him before he left the airport. She'd written her personal cell phone number on the back with a note. Please let us know if there's anything else we can do. On impulse, Marcus dialed the number. Linda answered on the second ring. Agent Williams, she said. I wasn't expecting to hear from you so soon. Is everything all right? I'm fine, Ms. Morrison, Marcus replied. I'm calling because I wanted to ask you something. What's going to happen to Captain Foster? There was a pause. He's been suspended pending a full investigation. Given the severity of what happened and the number of witnesses, I expect he'll be terminated. We also may face a lawsuit from you, which would be entirely justified. I'm not going to sue, Marcus said, but I do want to make a request. Before you terminate Captain Foster, I'd like to speak with him. Another pause, longer this time. Why would you want to do that? Because I think there might be an opportunity here for him to learn something, Marcus explained. I'm not excusing what he did. He should face consequences. But I've spent enough time in law enforcement to know that punishment without education rarely leads to change. If Captain Foster is willing to sit down with me and actually listen, really listen, maybe he can become part of the solution instead of part of the problem. That's very generous of you, Linda said slowly. But I have to ask, are you sure? This man humiliated you in front of hundreds of people. You don't owe him anything. I'm not doing it for him, Marcus replied. I'm doing it because I'm tired of the cycle. I'm tired of the anger and the fear and the misunderstanding. And if I can help break that cycle for even one person, it's worth it. Tom was staring at his brother with wide eyes. When Marcus hung up the phone, Tom shook his head in wonder. You really are going to try to help that man? I'm going to try to help us all, Marcus corrected. Because this isn't just about one racist pilot. It's about a society that's still struggling with its original sin. And change happens one conversation at a time, one heart at a time. 3 days later, Marcus found himself sitting in a small conference room at Transatlantic Airlines' Chicago offices. Linda Morrison sat to his left, and across the table, looking smaller and more defeated than he had in his pilot's uniform, sat Captain Brian Foster. Captain Foster couldn't meet Marcus's eyes. His hands were clasped on the table in front of him, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. Linda Morrison had explained that Captain Foster's suspension had been all over the news. The video from the airport had gone viral, and the pilot had been subjected to intense public criticism and judgment. Captain Foster, Marcus began, his voice calm and measured, thank you for agreeing to meet with me. Captain Foster finally looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed. Agent Williams, I don't know what to say. I'm so sorry for what I did. I was wrong, completely, totally wrong. Tell me why you did it, Marcus said. And I want the truth, not the polite answer you think I want to hear. What were you thinking when you saw me at that gate? Captain Foster's face contorted with emotion, shame, fear, self-loathing. I thought you didn't belong there, he admitted in a whisper. I saw you in that sweater and those pants, and I thought you couldn't possibly afford a first-class ticket. I thought, God, I'm ashamed to say this. I thought maybe you'd stolen a credit card or somehow scammed the system. Why did you think that? Marcus pressed. What about me made you assume I was a criminal? Your skin, Captain Foster said, the words barely audible. Because you're black, I looked at you and saw a threat, saw someone who didn't belong in first class, I saw every stereotype I've ever been taught or absorbed, and I acted on it without thinking, without questioning my own assumptions. Marcus leaned forward. Where did those assumptions come from, Captain, who taught you to see black men as threats? Captain Foster wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. I grew up in a small town in Ohio. My father was a cop. He used to come home and tell stories about his shifts, about the people he arrested, about the troublemakers in certain neighborhoods, and most of those stories were about black men. My father wasn't overtly racist, at least I didn't think he was at the time, but the message was clear. Black men were dangerous. Black men were criminals. Black men were the problem. And you never questioned that? Marcus asked. Not really, Captain Foster admitted. I mean, I didn't think of myself as racist. I've had black colleagues, black neighbors. I tell myself I judge people as individuals. But when I saw you at that gate, all those old messages came flooding back. It was instinct, reflex. I didn't stop to think. I just acted. That's the insidious thing about prejudice, Marcus said. It operates below the level of conscious thought. It's in the assumptions we make without realizing we're making them, the snap judgments we reach before our rational mind can intervene. And society reinforces these biases constantly through media, through segregation, through the stories we tell ourselves about who belongs where. Captain Foster nodded miserably. I know that now. I've had a lot of time to think over the past few days. I've read articles, watched videos, tried to educate myself, and I'm horrified by my own ignorance. Education is a start, Marcus said, but it's not enough. You need to do the harder work of examining every assumption you make, every instinct you follow. You need to question why you think what you think, why you feel what you feel. I don't deserve your forgiveness, Captain Foster said. I know that. I humiliated you, profiled you, treated you like a criminal when you'd done nothing wrong. You have every right to hate me. I don't hate you, Marcus replied, and he realized as he said it that it was true. I'm angry about what you did. I'm frustrated by the system that shaped you into someone who could do what you did. But I don't hate you. You're a human being who made a terrible mistake, and now you have to decide what kind of person you're going to be going forward. Linda Morrison spoke up for the first time. Captain Foster, as I've explained, Transatlantic Airlines is terminating your employment. What you did violated our policies and our values. However, if Agent Williams is willing, we'd like to offer you the opportunity to participate in a restorative justice program. It would involve extensive diversity training, community service, and ongoing dialogue with people of color about their experiences with discrimination. Captain Foster looked at Marcus. Would you be part of that, the dialogue? If you're genuinely committed to change, yes, Marcus said. But I need to know this isn't just about saving your career or your reputation. This has to be about you genuinely wanting to be better, to understand, to make amends. It is, Captain Foster said emphatically. I promise you it is. I've spent the last 3 days thinking about all the times I've made assumptions about people, all the ways I've contributed to the problem without even realizing it. I want to change. I need to change, not just for me, but for my daughter. Your daughter. Marcus asked. Captain Foster pulled out his phone and showed Marcus a photo of a young woman, maybe 19 or 20, with brown hair and a bright smile. This is Emma. She's a sophomore at Northwestern studying social justice. When she found out what I did, she called me crying, not because she was sad for me, but because she was ashamed of me. She said she'd spent her whole life learning about racism and discrimination, trying to be part of the solution, and then her father goes and does something like this. Captain Foster's voice broke. She told me she loved me, but that she was disappointed in me. And that broke my heart more than anything else, knowing that I'd let down my daughter, that I'd confirmed all the things she's been learning about systemic racism and unconscious bias. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't just about Captain Foster anymore. It was about his daughter Emma, about the next generation, about breaking cycles of prejudice before they could be passed on. Tell me about Emma, Marcus said. For the next hour, Captain Foster talked about his daughter, how she'd opened his eyes to issues he'd never thought about, how she'd challenged his assumptions, how she'd begged him to listen to her when she tried to explain concepts like white privilege and microaggressions. He talked about the arguments they'd had, the times he'd dismissed her concerns as youthful idealism, the ways he'd failed to hear what she was trying to tell him. She tried to warn me, Captain Foster said. She told me that I had blind spots, that I needed to examine my own biases. But I was arrogant. I thought I knew better. I thought I was one of the good ones. And then I went and proved exactly what she'd been trying to tell me. Marcus listened to all of this, and a plan began forming in his mind. When Captain Foster finished speaking, Marcus said, I have a proposition for you. My brother Tom lives here in Chicago. His wife just passed away, and we're setting up a scholarship fund in her memory. Alina was a first-grade teacher who spent her life helping children from all backgrounds learn and grow. I'm sorry for your loss, Captain Foster said sincerely. Thank you, Marcus acknowledged. Here's what I'm thinking. Part of that scholarship fund will include a mentorship program connecting students from underprivileged backgrounds with professionals who can guide them, support them, help them see possibilities they might not otherwise see. I'd like you to be part of that program. Captain Foster looked stunned. Me? Why would you want me involved in something like that? Because I believe in second chances, Marcus said. Because I think people can change if they're willing to do the work. And because those kids need to see that even people who make terrible mistakes can learn, grow, and become part of the solution. Your story, not the discrimination part, but the learning and growing part, could be powerful for young people trying to navigate a world full of prejudice. I don't know if I deserve that opportunity, Captain Foster said. Maybe you don't, Marcus replied honestly. But Alina believed in redemption. She believed that everyone deserves a chance to be better. And if I'm going to honor her memory, I need to embody those values even when it's hard. Linda Morrison looked between the two men with something like awe. Agent Williams, you're a remarkable person. No, Marcus corrected gently. I'm just someone who's tired of the way things are and willing to try something different. This might not work. Captain Foster might not follow through, but if we don't try, nothing will ever change. Marcus spent another week in Chicago, helping Tom begin to sort through Aliner's belongings, setting up the framework for the scholarship fund, and meeting with local schools and community organizations. Captain Foster attended several of these meetings, listening quietly as Marcus and Tom explained their vision. Emma Foster showed up at one of the meetings. She was a striking young woman with her father's height and her own fierce intelligence. She approached Marcus during a break. Agent Williams, I wanted to thank you, Emma said, for giving my dad a chance. I know what he did was wrong. I know he hurt you, but he's trying to change, really trying. I can see that, Marcus replied. He talks about you a lot. He's very proud of you. I'm not sure I'm proud of him yet, Emma said honestly. But I want to be. I want to believe people can change, that we can break these cycles. That's why I'm studying social justice, because I want to be part of building a better world. Then you're already doing the work, Marcus told her. Keep pushing, keep questioning, keep demanding better. The world needs people like you. On Marcus's last day in Chicago before flying back to Washington, he and Tom stood at Aliner's grave. Tom had brought fresh flowers, sunflowers, Aliner's favorite. Thank you, Tom said simply, for coming, for staying, for being my brother again. Always, Marcus replied. We lost too many years to misunderstanding and pride. I don't want to lose any more. When you came through that door, Tom said, when I saw you standing there, I felt like I could breathe for the first time since Aliner died. Like I wasn't alone anymore. That's what family does, Marcus. They show up, they stay, they hold you up when you can't stand on your own. Aliner taught me that, Marcus admitted. Her death reminded me what really matters, not the job, not the accolades, not the cases I solved. What matters is the people we love and the connections we make. The flight back to Washington was quiet and uneventful. Marcus sat in first class again, the upgraded return ticket Linda Morrison had provided, but this time there was no drama, no confrontation, just a peaceful journey home. Patricia was waiting at the airport when Marcus landed. She saw him coming through the arrival gate and rushed to embrace him. How was it? She asked. Hard, Marcus said. Beautiful, transformative. I have so much to tell you. That evening, sitting in their living room with tea and Patricia's famous oatmeal cookies, Marcus told his wife everything. He told her about the incident with Captain Foster, about the conversation with Edward and Dorothy Patterson, about Tom's grief and their reconciliation. He told her about the scholarship fund, about Captain Foster's journey toward change, about Emma Foster's passionate commitment to justice. Patricia listened to it all, occasionally asking questions, often just holding Marcus's hand. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, then said, I'm proud of you. For what? Marcus asked. For choosing understanding over anger, Patricia replied. For seeing the humanity in someone who didn't see yours, for taking something painful and transforming it into something that might actually change lives. That takes courage, Marcus. That takes grace. I learned it from you, Marcus said. 32 years of watching you. Forgive me when I missed dinners because of work. Forgive me when I was too obsessed with a case to be fully present. Forgive me when I chose the bureau over family. You taught me about grace long before I understood what grace really meant. Patricia smiled, her eyes glistening with tears. We've both learned a lot over the years. 6 months later, Marcus and Patricia flew to Chicago for the launch of the Aliner Williams Scholarship Fund. The event was held at the elementary school where Aliner had taught for so many years. The gymnasium was packed with former students, teachers, community members, and donors. Tom stood at the podium, looking healthier than he had in months. He'd lost some weight, started exercising, and thrown himself into building the scholarship fund. It had given him purpose, a way to honor Aliner's memory while helping the community she'd loved. My wife believed that every child deserves a chance to succeed, Tom said to the assembled crowd. She believed that with the right support, the right encouragement, the right opportunities, any child could learn and grow and thrive. This scholarship fund is our way of making sure Aliner's belief lives on, making sure that her legacy continues to touch lives. The fund raised over $200,000 that first year. 20 students received scholarships. And Captain Brian Foster, who'd been working with a diversity consultant and participating in community dialogues about race, became one of the program's volunteer mentors. Marcus watched as Captain Foster met his first mentee, a 14-year-old black boy named Jamal who wanted to be a pilot. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, but there was something beautiful in it too. Captain Foster, who'd once profiled a black man at an airport gate, was now helping a black teenager pursue his dream of flying. "You know what you want to be when you grow up," Captain Foster said to Jamal. "That's wonderful. It's never too early to start working toward your dreams." "Did you always want to be a pilot?" Jamal asked. "I did," Captain Foster replied. "Ever since I was about your age, but I also had people who believed in me, who helped me see that my dream was possible. That's what I want to do for you, help you see that you can achieve whatever you set your mind to." Marcus felt Patricia squeeze his hand. Edward and Dorothy Patterson had traveled from Pennsylvania for the event, and they stood on Marcus's other side. The four of them watched the interaction between Captain Foster and Jamal with hope and something like wonder. "Look at that," Dorothy whispered. "Who would have thought 6 months ago that we'd be standing here watching this?" "Change is possible," Edward said firmly. "We just have to be willing to do the work." Emma Foster approached the group, her face glowing with pride. "Agent Williams, Mrs. Williams, thank you so much for being here, and thank you for giving my dad this chance. He's a different person than he was 6 months ago. He listens now. He asks questions. He's learning." "We're all learning," Marcus replied. "That's the whole point of this, creating spaces where people can learn from each other, where we can break down the barriers that divide us." The evening ended with music and fellowship. Tom had hired a local band that played Motown classics, the Supremes, the Temptations, Marvin Gaye. It was the kind of music Alina had loved, and Tom stood in the middle of the gymnasium with tears streaming down his face, swaying to the rhythm. Marcus joined his brother, putting his arm around Tom's shoulders. "She'd be so proud of you," Marcus said. "She'd be proud of both of us," Tom corrected. "She always said we were better together than apart. She was right about that, like she was right about so many things." As Marcus and Patricia flew back to Washington the next day, Marcus thought about everything that had happened over the past 6 months. What had started as a painful moment of discrimination had somehow transformed into something else, a catalyst for change, for connection, for healing. He thought about Captain Brian Foster, about the long road ahead of him, about the work he'd have to keep doing to confront his biases and become the kind of person his daughter could be proud of. He thought about Jamal and the other scholarship recipients, about the opportunities they'd have because of Alina's legacy. He thought about Tom, about their reconciliation, about the years of brotherhood they'd reclaimed. And he thought about himself, about the journey he'd been on since retirement, about learning to be more than just an FBI agent, about discovering grace and forgiveness and the power of second chances. "What are you thinking about?" Patricia asked, noticing the thoughtful expression on her husband's face. "I'm thinking about my mother," Marcus replied. "About that trip to Washington when Tom and I were kids, about how she told us we could be anything, do anything. About how she believed in change even when change seemed impossible." "She was a wise woman," Patricia said. "She was," Marcus agreed. "And I'm finally understanding what she was trying to teach us. It's not enough to just fight against injustice. We have to build something better in its place. We have to create connections, build bridges, help people see each other's humanity." "That's exactly what you're doing," Patricia assured him. Marcus settled back in his seat, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in years. The work wasn't done, it would never be done. There would always be more Captain Fosters, more moments of discrimination, more barriers to overcome. But there would also be more Emma Fosters, more people willing to learn and change and grow. There would be more scholarships, more mentorships, more opportunities for connection. 1 year after the incident at the airport, Marcus received a letter from Captain Brian Foster. The letter was handwritten, several pages long and painfully honest. "Dear Agent Williams," it began, "I'm writing to tell you about my journey this past year. After I lost my job with Transatlantic Airlines, I thought my life was over. I was angry, defensive, full of self-pity. But then you offered me something I didn't deserve, a chance to be part of something larger than myself, an opportunity to learn and grow and maybe, just maybe, make amends for what I'd done. This year has been the hardest and most rewarding of my life. I've had to confront truths about myself that were painful to acknowledge. I've had to examine every assumption I've made, every instinct I've followed, every bias I've carried without questioning. I've read books, attended workshops, had difficult conversations with people whose experiences are nothing like mine. But most importantly, I've got to know Jamal. That young man you saw me with at the scholarship launch, he's become like a son to me. I meet with him every week. I've taught him about aviation, about weather patterns and navigation and the physics of flight. But he's taught me so much more about resilience, about living with dignity in a world that often doesn't see your worth, about dreaming big even when people tell you you're not good enough. Jamal told me last week that he's grateful I'm his mentor, and I broke down crying because I couldn't believe that this amazing young man, who should, by all rights, want nothing to do with someone like me, was grateful for my presence in his life. That's grace, Agent Williams. That's the kind of grace you showed me, that Jamal shows me, that I'm trying to learn to embody. I'll never stop being sorry for what I did to you, but I'm trying to make sure that moment of hatred becomes part of a longer story of learning and change. Emma tells me I'm getting better, that she can see the growth. Tom Williams has become a friend. We meet for coffee once a month to talk about the scholarship program and life and everything in between. Thank you for believing that people can change. Thank you for giving me the chance to prove it. Sincerely, Brian Foster. Marcus read the letter twice, then showed it to Patricia. She read it with tears in her eyes. Are you going to write back? Patricia asked. I am, Marcus said. And I'm going to invite him and Emma to Washington. I think it's time they met our grandchildren, saw our life. I want Emma to see that building bridges goes both ways, that reconciliation is an ongoing process. And so one sunny Saturday in June, Brian and Emma Foster came to Washington. They met Marcus and Patricia's 3 daughters and 7 grandchildren. They toured the monuments Marcus's mother had shown him and Tom all those years ago. They stood at the Lincoln Memorial and read the words carved in stone, "With malice toward none, with charity for all." Marcus's oldest daughter, Grace, named for her grandmother, pulled him aside at one point. Dad, I can't believe you invited him. After what he did to you. I know it seems strange, Marcus replied, but carrying anger and resentment would only hurt me. This way, finding a way forward, building something positive from something negative, this heals everyone involved. You're braver than I am, Grace said. No, Marcus corrected. I'm just old enough to know that life is too short for grudges, that we're all imperfect people trying to do better, that the world needs more grace and less judgment. That evening, the group gathered at Marcus and Patricia's home for a barbecue. Tom had flown in from Chicago as a surprise. When Marcus opened the door to find his brother standing there, the 2 men embraced like the boys they'd once been, before life had complicated things, before distance had grown between them. The yard filled with laughter and conversation. Brian Foster played catch with Marcus's grandchildren. Emma talked politics and social justice with Grace and her sisters. Dorothy and Edward Patterson, who'd become regular correspondents with Marcus and Patricia, sent a video message that everyone watched together. Tom stood at the grill flipping burgers and Marcus joined him. Elena would have loved this, Tom said softly. She would have, Marcus agreed. She always believed in the power of bringing people together. You know what the best part is? Tom asked. We're not just honoring Elena's memory, we're living it. We're doing what she did, bringing people together, building bridges, creating community. As the sun set and fireflies began to appear in the gathering darkness, Marcus looked around his backyard at this unlikely group of people who wouldn't have known each other, except for one moment of prejudice at an airport gate, one decision to choose understanding over anger, one commitment to building something better. His mother had been right all those years ago when she told him and Tom that they could do anything, be anything. But what Marcus understood now, what life had taught him through pain and grace and hard-won wisdom, was that the most important thing they could do was see each other's humanity, honor each other's dignity, and work together to build a world where everyone truly belonged. Thank you for listening. If this story touched you, please subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments.